Hi folks, welcome to our November TMN Tuesday event. This month we have a very special guest speaker from Texas A&M Forest Service talking to us about healthy forests. As we get started with our TMN monthly webinar today, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We always like to do a quick tech check with all of our attendees. As a reminder, the TMN Tuesday events are open to the public. If this is your first TMN Tuesday webinar, as an attendee, don't worry, you cannot unmute or share your video, and that is on purpose. We do want to make sure that our speaker today has is given the attention that he deserves and is able to share his message with us, and we don't have all talking bird heads. Again, if this is your first TMN Tuesday webinar, welcome. We're happy to have you here. We are going to be using chat today to be able to communicate and ask questions of our speaker. As chat questions come in today, I'll be moderating those and save them until the end to be able to ask to Alan today. If you're getting to this point in the webinar and you're saying, wait, hold on, Mary Pearl's saying something and I can't hear her, hopefully I've given you enough time to read this screen and you are adjusting your audio connections, making sure that you have your speakers plugged in. You can't hear me to tell you to plug your speakers in, but hopefully you are doing that now to be able to hear and participate in our webinar today. Give them just another minute. And then I already mentioned this, but as a reminder, we will be using our chat function to be able to ask questions of our speaker today. Please help me as moderator to be able, by asking your questions to everyone, and with the best spelling and grammar and lack of, what are they called? Acronyms as possible, so that I can ask the right question to Alan that you're intending for me to ask. And again, please be respectful and professional in all discussions that are happening in the chat so that we can stay on topic and focus on the materials being presented today. Full and clear sentences also help me to help you ask the right questions to Alan today. All right, trying to keep this tech real short and sweet. We do still have a 1-800 number that is our call center, and our FAQs on the WebEx help page are a great resource for asking additional questions if you need additional help. So our webinar etiquette for today, as mentioned previously, we are recording for today's webinar. If you are a master naturalist, you can count today as a 1 hour of advanced training. Please help us keep all content on topic and professional and respectful of our speaker in our chat. And I'll be moderating those questions and asking them when the time arrives. Okay. Oh, I forgot. One more announcement before we get into the content for today. Our December TMN Tuesday event, the registration link for that has been adjusted. So if you previously registered for that, you may need to go back and re-register for the December TMN Tuesday webinar. That has been put out on our Master Naturalist listserv. It's going to be, it is on our website, and I'll drop that link here in the chat here in just a second. But our December TMN Tuesday WebEx link has changed, and we are making sure that everybody has that updated link as soon as we can get that back out to y'all. So that new registration link is on our website now. We're also sending it, all current registrants have been moved over as well. Our 2024 dates for our TMN Tuesdays are also coming soon. I'm sorry, Alan, I know I keep building up the suspense for your presentation today. Oh, yeah. I forgot that I put in a couple of announcements. We're getting to the end of the year and people are already starting to ask about next year, getting their fancy new planners put into place and getting their dates set on their calendars for 2024. So we do have one more TMN Tuesday for December, and then we'll be announcing those 2024 dates here in just a little bit. And so watch our listserv for those dates and our website for those dates as they get announced here pretty quick. But as always, our TMN Tuesday events are open for the public. They are free. Registration is required. And the recording that I'm doing today will be posted on the website, if not by this afternoon, first thing tomorrow morning as well. Okay, now we're there. So today we're going to be talking about healthy forests. We have a great presenter from Texas A&M Forest Service. He's going to be talking about better living through management. Alan Smith is the Regional Forest Health Coordinator and an entomologist, and is going to be sharing with us today, not from the state of Texas. He got called, just a week ago?
Yeah.
Up to the Carolinas, I believe you said you were. And is helping to manage a forest situation up there. And Alan, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about where you are, and then I'll give you that presenter rights.
Sure. So that's a great segue, Mary Pearl. Thanks. My first slide is actually a slide from a fire that I was on 7 years ago up here in North Carolina, actually just on the other side of the mountain that we're currently on. And we're up here fighting the Cottle Ridge fire. It's about 5,400 acres, and we're hoping we get some rain and some weather this weekend that kind of puts a damper on it and maybe gets us home in time for Thanksgiving. So we'll see.
Okay, so you should be able to share your screen now.
Trying now. How's that?
Great photo.
Great.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So that was taken 7 years ago, just on the other side of the hill we're on right now, during the supermoon, right before the big fire in Gatlinburg burned a major portion of that city down and killed a couple folks over there. Like I said, we're on the other side of the mountain now, and if I apologize for the rather drab background behind me today, we're actually working in an abandoned nursing home in North Carolina, so it's not the most upbeat setting, but it's quiet here, so that's nice. But today we're going to talk about, let's see here. Here we go. Healthy forests, better living through management. I usually deliver a lot of presentations on specific forest health issues, and those can get really nice and detailed in the weeds and fairly interesting. But today we're going to do a basic overview. And what I really like, and with the previous slide with the fire back in North Carolina, we're going to be talking about cycles and circles of life and how all this stuff interrelates to each other and what really is a healthy forest and what we can do to maintain it. And at the end, we'll talk about what you as master naturalists can do to help maintain healthy forests and help us in the Texas A&M Forest Service do our jobs to help serve you as Texans. Keep hitting the wrong button, so let's see here. So we have a couple goals today. Mainly, we're going to learn about some forest threats and how a healthy forest and environment can actually combat them, while maybe exposing y'all to some new concepts and paradigms about forestry and maybe a new way of looking at how we do things on the ground. And it's important. Why do we do it? Well, the population of the world is increasing almost exponentially. We have right now almost 8 billion people out there, and they use about 11.5 million tons of wood and wood products every day. Of that, 8 billion people, the United States is only 4.5% of that total population, but we use almost more than a quarter of the total wood production and intake every day. And that's kind of a large imbalance that we'll talk about a little bit later. But what does that kind of 11.5 million tons of wood used every day actually look like? Well, if you take Cowboys Stadium, I guess it's now AT&T Stadium, it has an interior volume about 104 million cubic feet. And when you look at the inside, that kind of gives you an idea what that looks like. And so total world consumption is really about 3 full stadiums each and every day of wood and wood products being consumed by humans on the planet. So it's a staggering consumption of a renewable resource, but it's that ability to keep that resource renewable where we come into play with the idea and concept of forest health. When we look at what happens across the planet, the United States uses more wood than all the other kind of building materials combined. And of that wood, our 13 southern states, basically Region 8 of the U.S. Forest Service, We currently supply about 60% of the entire United States demand, and most of that wood, a large majority of it, actually comes from privately owned, family-owned forests. And then when you look at it on a global countrywide scale, the southern United States produces more timber than any other single country on the planet. And that's important because demand for wood and wood products, especially from the South, has risen over 32% in the last 20 years or so. And that's due to urban sprawl and humans and our incessant consumption of wood and wood products. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So it's interesting, when I first started forestry school on day one, they told us this is going to be an interesting concept for you to understand, but the answer to every single question in forestry is it depends. It really does depend on what's going on in the environment, what's the individual tree doing, what's the landowner's goal. It all just depends. And even that extends to what is the definition of a forest. And when you look up what is a forest, there's over 800 different kind of accepted definitions of a forest. So where do you really define it? So let's talk about that for a second. Basically, it's kind of, the concept we all kind of grew up with is it's a community of trees and shrubs and associated plants and organisms that cover a landscape, and they consume oxygen, water, and soil nutrients, and that it matures and changes and reproduces itself over time. And that's a great concept, but it's not a real specific definition. We can look at it being a three-dimensional ecological system dominated mostly by trees and other woody vegetation that exists in this dynamic interaction. That's a lot of good buzzwords in there. But really, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has this very specific definition of forest. And that's a piece of ground that's about a half acre in size with trees higher than 5 meters and a canopy cover of more than 10%, or ground that's able to reach those thresholds already in place. And what we need to really understand about when we define a forest is that it's a system, it's a complex ecological system that is layered in the structure and the functional parts of it. And that's a big concept that we need to understand. It's not just what it looks like, but what it does. And it really, the definitions that we use in forestry and forestry management, and when we talk about forest health, those definitions are meant to include all of the plants and animals that are dependent on the existing ground conditions. And we divide those into different types of forest types. You might hear, longleaf pine or an oak hickory or a spruce fir forest. Those are the dominant tree species, and that's how we just kind of categorize it and talk about it in generalized terms. And in those specific tree communities, we expect to see certain plants and animals. And it's very important when we talk about forest and we talk about forest management, especially when we look at what's happening in the state of Texas, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, that we talk about the size of the forest, because the size actually does matter. There is a definite distinction between a forest, a woodland, and a single tree, and how we manage those specific problems or prevent problems from getting started in those specific situations. I tell folks all the time, they call me up with a problem on their forest, and they start talking. It's like, okay, well, great. How many acres do you have? Well, I have 10 acres of forest. And I have to kind of explain to them that, look, that's great. That's 9.5 more acres than I own, but it's not technically a forest. You have a woodland. And the way that you can manage that 10 acres is way different than how we would manage a forested setting over 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, 100,000 acres. It matters on a scale. And so size actually does matter when we talk about forest and forestry. We'll show a couple graphs or charts, maps here of where the forests are on the planet. And this is the percentage of the land mass of each country covered by forest. And you kind of see gives you a picture of where those forests are distributed globally. But that doesn't really show you actually the picture of where the forests actually are. So we dive down a little bit deeper and we can see, You look at the continental United States, for example, there's a large swath right in the middle that doesn't have forestry in it. That's where we have the Great Plains and our large agricultural production happens. And you can see what the distribution of forestry is across Africa and the Middle East and Central Asia. And look at Australia, for example. So different forest types cover different biomes of the planet. And when we look at the United States, we see this distribution, mainly in the South. We're looking at pine species and some oak, hickory, gum forest type things. Then we look out in the West, and you can see the distribution there of the forests across the United States. So it's not a contiguous thing, and that becomes an important issue later when we talk about one of our major forest threats, which is human expansion and growth. So here's just a little map that shows the major tree and forest communities of our southern forest. This is Region 8 of the United States Forest Service. These are our 13 southern states. And in forestry, when we talk about southern forestry, these are the states that we're talking about. And you can see the distribution there in Texas and how the plant communities kind of change to across the Gulf Coast into Florida, and how as you get interior into Tennessee and Kentucky and Western Virginia, how you get into a more oak hickory type landscape. So it matters what kind of tree communities you are currently in, and it's great that we're in this group of varied master naturalist chapters from across the state, so you can look at these maps and see, hey, this is the kind of forestry cover that I see, and that is in my backyard. And when we look at the state of Texas, we actually have 7 regions that we're divided into these different forestry communities. And I live and work mostly in the pine woodlands over there in Region 1, but I saw that there were some folks that were joining in from the mountain regions over outside of El Paso. You have totally different, ponderosa pine communities, where, as in East Texas, we're growing loblolly pine. And Central Texas has a different environment, a different forest type. And you can see the large quantity of forest that's over there in central and western Texas, which is not really typically what we would think about a forest, but it does meet the technical definition of a forest. And it has some different system services, which we'll talk about in a bit. So what does a healthy forest really look like? Well, it has a large biodiversity in both plant and animal species. And mainly we're looking at tree species. It's not a monoculture, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of our kind of pitfalls we see over here in East Texas. We plant loblolly pine as a commercial crop for fiber and wood, and it tends to occur in plantation type settings, which are monocultures and not as diverse as what we would call a typical forest. A healthy forest will have different tree age and size classes, which gives it some resiliency to change and disturbance. It'll have a variety of different habitats, streamside zones, hillside zones, rocky outcroppings, things like that. It's able to support sustainable management practices and can be enhanced through sustainable management practices. And it is really basically characterized by an overall health of the soil and of the water. And so if you want to see if your forest or your landscape is healthy, check your soil, check your water. You should have good biodiversity, good organism counts in those biomes, and that will give you an indication of how healthy your overall landscape is. And so it's really interesting that a healthy forest has the ability to sustain kind of a unique species composition and these processes that exist within it. And we need to understand that healthy forests can actually contain unhealthy trees. And we'll see in just a second that that's actually a very important part of being a healthy forest. Trees come and go, they die. And believe it or not, in my line of work, I'm baffled still to this day that a lot of folks don't understand that a 300-year oak tree, a 300-year-old oak tree will eventually die. It has a lifespan of sometimes 300 years. And people have a hard time wrapping their minds around that concept sometimes. But when we talk about forest health, what's super important to understand is that it's a relative concept. It depends upon what species that are on that landscape, what processes or resources of interest we have as humans. It's a human construct. Is it a healthy forest if it's just sitting out there doing nothing? Well, that depends on who you talk to. And so we have to kind of come to common ground, get common terms, and understand really what we're looking for. And as we'll see in just a few minutes, a lot of times that can be a problem for managing for a healthy forest. So like I mentioned earlier, we need to look at the function of the forest, not just its structure. We need to understand that forests are these dynamic entities, and they go through this process of succession and disturbance, and that these forests are important not just from a commercial, I'm getting wood, I'm making toilet paper out of it, but they're providing a variety of ecosystem services. And now we have some tools that can allow us to actually quantify and put dollar signs and numbers to what those ecosystem services might be. So just back up just a little bit to basic, 7th, 8th grade science here. Forests undergo change. They're dynamic entities. That process is called forest succession. And a lot of times we see it in a linear timeline where we get these initial plants coming in, and then after a while they grow a little taller, shrubs start to develop, and then we see trees coming in for about 26 to 50 years or so. Those trees will grow into a mature type of forest for 150 years, and then eventually you reach what's called a climax forest, and that's kind of the penultimate forest that you would see, barring any other issues. And this is an interesting model, and it's kind of easy to understand, but it's not really what happens on the landscape or in real life. And so if we actually take this linear model and we turn it into a circle, and we introduce this concept of disturbance, we really understand forest succession. That at any point along that timeline, from grass to shrub to young tree to old tree, we can have a disturbance. It might be natural, it might be man-made, and those are going to be our forest health threats. We'll talk about those in a second as well. But that disturbance can either speed up succession to the next stage, or it can delay it and hold it at a particular stage, or even in some cases, set it back a stage. And so we can make it all the way through the successional chain over to a climax forest, and then something disastrous happens, or something ground shaking, earth shaking happens, some big disturbance, and it resets succession at some point on that timeline. And the ultimate goal is to get to this idea of a climax community, which is a stable community at the very end, where all the conditions are suitable for all the members of the community, and it will stay that way pretty much, by itself, unless something happens to it, and we call those disturbances. And here's a few examples of what climax community looks like. Some places, like the deserts, are not able to support plant life, so their climax community is just simple, bare earth. We have the American Southwest, where we see the grasslands with the small shrubs, all the way up to the bottom right corner, our boreal forest, where kind of what we would typically think of as a climax end. It's all forest, all trees. Those trees are not going to change to oaks. Oaks won't grow there. They're going to be stuck in that spruce, pine, fir forest indefinitely until a disturbance happens. And so when we talk about ecosystem services, these are the things that forests, and especially healthy forests, can provide us. Number one, of course, is our source of timber and fiber, and that's typically what we rank and value our forests on, especially here in the South. But when we look at our urban landscapes, and when we look at different things, we see that ecosystem services like wildlife habitat and diversity are important. Recreational opportunities and scenic landscapes, the ability to convert carbon dioxide, water quality improvements, buffering and mitigation of all sorts of natural disasters, climate change mitigations, and the ability to actually regulate our climate with creation of rainfall, in some cases with a lot of transpiration, or creating drought when we remove forest from the landscape. And those systems, those are great concepts, really kind of large and nebulous. But when we look at what happens in Texas, and we look at our Texas forestry distribution, we see our commercial kind of historical forest limited to this section over here in East Texas, about 50 counties or so. And we see that 94% of that land is privately owned. It's about 12 million acres of commercial timberland over here. It's our 6th most valuable agricultural commodity for the whole state, and it has a payroll of about 3.7 billion and employs over 66,000 people. So it has a direct economic impact. And those forests, like I said before, are mostly family forest owned. 67 or so percent are private family owned. Industry owns about 2%, and real estate investment trusts, also private entities, own the other 21%. And so the state of Texas only has about 8% of our forest land public, where you contrast that with California, Idaho, Washington, those numbers are reversed. You have about 90 something percent of those forests out in the West being publicly owned, with only about 8 or 10% or so being privately owned. And those have management implications in what we do and how we manage for forest health. So when we look at the economics and these ecosystem services that forests provide directly to Texas, we see about $23 billion into the economy directly through forest products. But the other ecosystem services provide even more value, almost $93 billion annually. And that includes, just over $4 billion for climate regulation, air quality, $193 million a year, just for clean air from our trees. And it's really interesting is the urban forests that we see in our large urban cities actually have an impact that's worth about $2.3 billion. And when you total the urban forest in Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, you're looking at, about 600,000 acres of urban forest that have a direct input, not only to our, well-being, health, green spaces, and things like that, but these ecosystem services, keeping our environment clean and providing things for us, that has a definite value as well. So here's two photographs of green, healthy trees. Everything looks healthy in both forests, but I would contend that the forest in the upper left is not as healthy as the one in the bottom right. The one in the upper left is a pine plantation in East Texas, and it looks good. The trees look nice and healthy. They're green like you want them to be, but it's not really diverse. We don't see a lot of different landscapes. There's no creeks running through it. There's nothing going on really except pine growing on the landscape. And it's healthy pine, no doubt, but that's pretty much what it is. The bottom photograph on the right is from a national park out west, and you can see there's a stream community, there's a meadow community, you have a variety of tree species out there, there's bare rock outcroppings, different things going on. It's that biodiversity and age, composition, landscape type that really defines what a healthy forest should look like visually. So let's talk about some threats to forest health. We have some obvious ones like pests, invasive plants, different diseases. Then we have our big ones like fire. That's what I'm out here in North Carolina working on right now. Natural disasters, drought, climate change, and then a lot of human-caused things, development, urban sprawl, and fragmentation. And it needs to be understood that these threats don't exist in a vacuum. We often see them combining to make a whirlwind of pain and sadness. They're synergistic, they breed off of each other, one can lead into another, and we really need to understand that we're all interconnected and these things all matter, not just as a standalone issue, but as an overall forest health, happy, healthy forest and human population dynamic as well. So let's talk of just a couple real quickly about some insect pests. We have problems both with native insects and non-native insects. And one of our main one, of course, we look at our beetles out there. Those seem to be highly problematic, not just here in Texas, but all across the United States. And of course, I'm talking about the southern pine beetle. This is a native insect. It's our most destructive forest pest across the Southeast. It's related to other forest pests that cause even greater damage out in the western United States. They're very tiny. You can see 7 of them on the head of a penny right there. So very small pest, very large problem. They have a distribution that was for a while very well understood down through Central and South America, or Mexico and Central America, and then in the southern parts of the United States. This slide was built back in, I don't know, 2004 or 5 or so, and you can kind of see it stops in Maryland, southern, Pennsylvania, and that was really the extent of the range of the southern pine beetle. But as climate has warmed up and beetles have migrated north, we're now starting to find southern pine beetle in New Jersey, all across Long Island in New York, in Connecticut, in Maine, New Hampshire, and it's starting to spread into other species that are not southern yellow pine. So this is not just a typical forest threat that we would see here in the South and in East Texas, but it's going to be a major forest pest for the white pine industry all across the upper Midwest, where, Wisconsin and Michigan, where they grow white pine commercially. If the southern pine beetle decides that it really does well in those, it can take off, and it would function similar to an invasive species to those forest communities in that area. So we're seeing as the temperature is warming, the conditions are great, the beetles are spreading. And it's a pretty dramatic spread. Here, I like to show these photographs. This is of a wilderness area over here on the eastern side of East Texas. The lake in the background is Toledo Bend Reservoir. Louisiana is on the other side over there. And this was taken in July of '92. And we see a couple small spots of southern pine beetle killed timber. At this point, it was, around 20, 25 acres or so. The beetles spread, these spots coalesced, and within 1 year, that same area tended to look like this, which was about 10,000 acres of ultra mature pine. And those trees were large enough you couldn't get your arms around them, over 100 feet tall, really prime timber to make saw logs and boards out of. That timber was wasted. It was unable to be all harvested and salvaged, and it was quite dramatic. We used to teach kids and people about these slides that, man, those southern pine beetles went in there and they killed that forest. Well, when we look at back succession, what I talked about earlier, they didn't kill the forest, they changed the forest. They removed the pine community. They left the oaks, the sweet gums, the hickories, and those trees have repopulated and have reforested and have started the new climax community that we would normally see in East Texas. Not a pine community, but an oak community. And that's what's happening on this forest now. The beetles didn't kill this forest. They just changed it successionally to a new type of forest. So it's kind of an interesting paradigm shift that we've been talking about. Then we look at things like invasive plants and insects, and there's a specific definition there that it's a species that is native or non-native, it doesn't really matter, to its particular ecosystem that it comes to, that when it gets there, it can cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health, or is likely to do so. And when, of course, we talk about beetles in forestry communities, the main invasive insect beetle that we see right now, of course, is the emerald ash borer. And the emerald ash borer has been decimating ash populations across the United States since its introduction in 2002. And when we look at our host distribution maps of green ash and white ash across the South and across the United States, there's a very real possibility that this invasive insect removes ash trees as a genus from the landscape entirely. And we're working in the Texas Forest Service, Texas A&M Forest Service, and our partners to try to slow the spread and understand what we can really do to preserve ash on our landscape. And if you look down in the bottom left corner, you can see that, yeah, there's a lot of trees that are out there, ash trees, but it really is not a large component of our rural forests. But in urban areas, it becomes quite a major component. That's 3 to 4% over all Texas urban areas. Some urban areas plant way more ash than others. I know that my parents, my dad lives up in North Dallas area in Denton, south of Denton. And when their neighborhood was built, they came around and said, do you want one ash tree or do you want 2 ash trees in your yard? And they came through and they put the exact same tree or 2 trees in everybody's yard. And they're just setting themselves up for, the loss of their ash trees as the emerald ash borer takes them. And so when we look at southern pine beetle, for example, our averages across the southern United States, we've kind of have a handle on average about $43 million a year in normal years. And that doesn't include things like timber futures and mill production adjustments and things that cost a lot of money. But it is our major native southern forest pest. Emerald ash borer is a totally different animal, of course, and its costs exceed over $13 billion. And when you put that into perspective, if you were to turn a dollar into a mile, 12.7 billion miles is 500,000 trips around the world. So it's a staggering amount of money that we just can't really get our minds around, that the emerald ash borer is taking from us. One of our other forest threats, of course, are invasive plants. We have some obvious ones like kudzu coming in through Georgia and through North Carolina. This plant is over covering everything up in here. It's all dried up and dying right now, and going senescent for the winter, which is now going to be a fire hazard. But this is what we see in this part of the world during the spring and summer. When we look at our invasive plants, they not just threaten the health of our forest, but other plant species that are out there. They are threatening about 180 candidate species that are at risk to be removed, and they have some direct impact on ecosystem services. Where we take a look at salt cedar out in western Texas and the western United States, it takes usually $450 to $2,800 annually per hectare in water loss, as well as your flood control losses. So you're losing a direct loss there. And then when you have to go back and clean it up and eradicate it and revegetate to get back to a more natural state, you're looking at costs of about $7,500 per hectare. And so just the cost of management to get rid of something that already exists can be quite overwhelming and staggering, and leads in some cases to gridlock and inaction. Of course, in East Texas and across southern Texas, we have Chinese tallow tree as an invasive plant, originally grown as an ornamental, but now it's escaped and gone kind of feral and gotten out there. We actually distributed it all throughout the Gulf Coast in the early 1900s by the USDA Forest Service to establish a soap making industry. Didn't really take off too well, and now it's regarded in Texas by the Texas Department of Agriculture as a noxious weed and is controlled and regulated. And it's pretty interesting when you look at the city of Houston. Our studies and estimates and plot sampling down there indicates about a quarter of the Houston urban forest is actually invasive Chinese tallow tree. And what makes it so invasive? Just like a lot of other invasive plants, it doesn't have any native local pests that can keep it in check. It matures very early. It has a heavy seed production. That seeds can remain viable in soil and under the right conditions for over 100 years. The seedlings, when they start growing, have an understated amount of vigor. They're quite vigorous growers. You whack them back a little bit, you just make them mad. They come back 3 times as aggressive. Their fruits and their seeds are spread by birds, mammals, and water. So they disperse rapidly and over across large distances. And this is a very, very aggressive colonizer. And so it becomes very problematic when this plant shows up on your landscape. Another one that we're seeing across the South, and that we actually do have a spot or two here in the state of Texas, is Kogan grass. It's a grass, it's an aggressive perennial. It grows in these little circular infestations to about 5 foot tall, and it really does start to dominate your understory and can shade out and get rid of all of your other native plants. And that, of course, has cascading effects on the wildlife and things that depend on that. They form these large monocultures, and it's great at being an invader because it does very well in low light environments. So under shady conditions, it's adapted to grow with fire, so we can burn it, but it just reinvigorates that plant. It starts to grow more aggressively. It's very drought tolerant. It likes soils that don't have a lot of nutrients, that won't really support any other type of plant growth. So it's the only thing that can grow there. It takes over and starts to grow really well. And when we look at worldwide, it infests about 500 million acres. It's found on every continent except Antarctica. It was first, identified over here in Mobile, Alabama. As you can see how it's spread across, we actually have on the ground Kogan grass infestation in Hardin County, I believe that is, Tyler County in East Texas. The one county in, I guess that's Brazos County, It's actually just in an herbarium over there, but they count that as having it in your county. So we're pretty fortunate we don't have this spreading across the state of Texas, but it's important that we monitor, look out for it, and when we do find it, we take action to eradicate it. All right, let's talk about some threats like diseases. One of them is an invasive disease brought in by an invasive beetle called the laurel wilt fungus. This is a fungus carried by an ambrosia beetle that their biology is they um, attack a tree. The female lays her eggs in the tree. She deposits this fungus inside the galleries that the larvae are developing in, and the larvae feed on the fungus, the ambrosia that she has inoculated the tree with. This particular fungus just happens to cause vascular clogging and wilting of the trees that it infects and eventually results in their death. It goes into all the Lauraceae trees, including mostly red bay. That's called the red bay ambrosia beetle because that's where it was first identified, but also sassafras trees. And that's important because when we look at the distribution of red bay and sassafras and the overlay where we find these beetles, we can see that, especially down in the bottom right, the ability of the beetle to survive across the range of sassafras, they match up pretty well, which puts about 99% of North America's sassafras at risk of loss to red bay ambrosia beetle and the laurel wilt fungus. Luckily, sassafras trees are not really preferred by the red bay ambrosia beetle, so it doesn't spread quite as rapidly as it does through our red bay trees. And it's important because, of course, these red bay trees provide food and shelter to animals. Um, we've lost over a third of the total red bay population across the United States right now. We got two species of swallowtail butterflies, my favorite actually, that rely almost exclusively on red bay and spicebush, both Lauraceae trees, to complete their life cycle. And to lose these beautiful pollinators would just be a tragic shame, not to mention an ecological disaster. Um, and we have two particular, specific trees and plant species, the pond spice and the pond berry, that are at risk of extinction if laurel wilt takes hold through them and starts to decimate their populations. Another disease that we have across the Texas landscape, and I'm sure our Heart of Texas master naturalists and the folks all around the capital area know this one really well, is laurel wilt. It's another vascular pathogen. It goes into oak trees. It clogs up the water conducting tissue, the xylem, and the tree stops that infection by plugging the xylem. But that, of course, prevents the water from getting to the leaves. The leaves wilt, and over time, the trees die. We have it spread pretty much all across the state of Texas. It's not really in East Texas, though there are some trains of thought that think it actually might be in East Texas, but we have other fungi and the trees are wet and healthy enough that they actually outcompete the oak wilt fungus. So it's not a major problem for tree mortality in East Texas at this point, but you can see the distribution across Texas and the United States there. We've impacted tens of thousands of acres throughout Central and West Texas, and it does have a direct impact on your property value. If this happens to be your house, you built your driveway around this grand old oak tree, well, laurel wilt fungus got it and they killed it, you're going to actually have to have that tree removed because it will fall down and crush your cars, your kids, your pets. And so it does have a direct impact on your pocketbook and the overall value of your property. One of our other big forest threats, of course, is fire. We use it as a tool in forest management. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But we need to understand that if we have poorly managed forests, they're very prone to catastrophic fire events. They have a lot of dead standing timber in them, snags, invasive plants like kudzu that would cover trees and then die back in the winter. You get a small spark or a small fire in that area. That fire climbs the dead kudzu, climbs the Japanese climbing fern, and gets into the canopy of these 100-foot tall trees and burns the tops of the trees out and kills the forest. So it's can be a major problem. When we look at our wildland fire potential, this is one we use all the time. We can see across Texas, especially up in the Panhandle, we have a high and very high wildland fire potential because it's dry, it's windy, the conditions are right. East Texas, we get a little more moisture. So while we do have wildfires, They're usually not as large or as devastating or as dramatic because the trees in the forest are managed, they're healthy, and we get a little bit more moisture, is it too. So when we look at a well-managed forest, right, they have a lower fuel loading. That's the amount of debris and dead timber and standing timber and things that are in them. They have the proper species composition, so we're not looking at things that dry out and die during high prone fire conditions. Usually those they have a managed under or mid-story, so the lower plant community levels, shrubs, those kinds of things are kept in check, so we don't get that ladder effect for our fires. And that results, of course, in lower fire intensity, increased survivability of the trees and the plants, and on the selfish end of it, easier control and suppression for when we actually have to go in and manage that fire. The map that you see on the left over there is from, I'm going to say 2011. And that is the Riley Road fire, which occurred right outside of Conroe, a major urban area, and it got almost 20,000 acres in size over just a week or so, a couple weeks. And so, poorly managed forest under the right conditions, there's that synergistic effect. We can see an explosive fire happen in areas where we would not normally expect or experience that. But it also needs to be understood that excluding fire from the landscape can also be harmful to our healthy forests. We end up with higher fuel loadings, denser stands that burn and spread and move a fire quicker through them. We like to get and use fire as a management tool on a low level prescribed burn type situation where we can kind of control it. We can keep it maintained in a certain area at a certain flame height and get a desired result. Without it, you end up with a dog hair thicket like this, and any spark or any problem in that forest becomes not a controllable issue, but a raging wildfire, and really puts people at risk and their homes and values. One of our other big threats is the drought. We've been under an extensive drought since 2019, and we've had some wet periods, but overall we're in this drought type situation. We watch the drought monitor that's done by the USDA and the Weather Service and others that produce these models that show us areas of the state where we're concerned about drying conditions and fire potential, especially when those overlap with unmanaged or poorly managed forests. And they can be kind of normal, it's pretty dry and hot out there in October of 2019 to drought conditions that we saw in late, early October of 2011, where the entire state pretty much was under extreme drought. And if we have a well-managed, thinned forest, a healthy forest where the trees are growing vigorously, you have good plant communities moving around, those forests are actually less susceptible to drought and other issues because you have less competition that those trees are fighting for water for, and they grow more healthy. Another threat, of course, are natural disasters. In the United States, that's hurricanes and flooding. And when you look, of course, at Hurricane Katrina, one of our biggest, everybody points to Katrina. The estimate's about 320 million trees in Louisiana and Mississippi were killed outright by that hurricane. And it's not just the hurricane blowing the trees down and breaking them. It's what happens afterwards. You get flooding, saltwater intrusion can kill through the roots. It dries the trees out, they die. Or the trees can be flooded, it shuts their root uptake down, and they go into what we call a physiological drought. There's plenty of water on the landscape, but the trees are basically drowned in it. And in East Texas especially, our pine trees don't like to have wet feet, and so they can die fairly easily. Certain other species, mangroves and things, they don't mind being in the water, and so it's not as a bad issue for them. We can also replicate physiological drought in Texas, Central Texas, and other areas by overwatering our post oaks during drought periods. Those roots the tree will basically go into a physiological drought and the tree dies. So be very careful with that. When we have a well-managed, well-planned forest, it mitigates the impacts of hurricanes. Those forests act as wind barriers and buffers, slowing it down. They act as flooding buffers, reducing storm surge. We like to see that. On slopes, the roots eliminate mudslides, avalanches, soil loss, keeping that healthy soil on the site. They'll protect those streamside management zones from over flooding and from washing banks out and from spreading across the landscape. And of course, we can use the wood afterwards, even if it's been killed and knocked over. If it's salvageable, we can actually use that as building material to rebuild after a hurricane. And some of them are quite dramatic. The picture on the left there, those trees were actually snapped off at a certain height with straight line winds. That wasn't from a hurricane. That was just straight line winds during one of their kind of freak windstorms that we get occasionally. We have another big threat, climate change, where we saw kind of a stabilization of plant communities and tree communities across the United States. But as things have warmed up and conditions have become more favorable for our southern species, we see encroachment and spread of those northward. Has impacts on the local tree populations. As the newcomers come in, they have a different growing regime. They're not constrained by typical insect pests and industries in some cases, so they can take over. And then we get that, of course, imbalance in the natural process, an invasive tree species, basically, where we get an increased risk and duration of droughts, extreme precipitation, flooding events. We get increased wildfire risk with climate change drying out. Decreasing sap production is a big one in trees. As trees get warmer and drier, the sap production slows down, and that sap production is the tree's natural defense against insect and disease encroachment. Of course, hot, warm growing conditions are great for tree growth. We're increasing our CO2 levels, and that's what trees like, and that will benefit those trees on good sites and alter their distribution, and that's how they spread, of course, across the landscape. And here's a couple models that show predictions for loblolly pine, what we typically grow in East Texas. Over on the top left is what we see currently according to our inventory. But we look at these different models, and you can see the spread of loblolly pine up through Kentucky, up through West Virginia, into Ohio in some cases, where they have no idea what that tree is really up there now. And of course, as loblolly pine spreads, it brings with it southern pine beetle, Ips beetles, ambrosia beetles, other things that come with it, which can cause problems on their landscape. But of course, the number one threat to forest health is us, is people, overpopulation. This was taken at a festival, and it's great, and people look for Waldo in it, and I'll tell you right now, Waldo is not in this, so no need to freeze it and search. He's not there. But when we look at the predictions and what everybody is saying is that by 2070 or so, that forests on non-federal lands will decrease by about 40 million acres. 40, it's in thousands, so minus 40,000. So these huge numbers of decrease in forest cover across the United States, because we're taking up more space. We got to go somewhere. We need the agricultural land to feed us. We're encroaching into these forest lands. And when we look at urban populations and what will happen with them and the predicted loss of our rural forests, as our urban centers expand, those rural forests decrease. And you can see the dark red areas in Texas. That's 36 to 72% of the private forest is expected to be developed. And so that's a huge decrease in this forest component across our landscape. And when we look at the United States, Texas has 8 of the 15 fastest growing cities. And in Texas, 86% of all Texans live in an urban area. And so that's a kind of a staggering number, that we're providing ecosystem services and benefits, timber and fiber and things, from a very, very relatively small portion of our forest land in Texas that's decreasing as our populations grow and our urban centers expand. Another big threat to forest health is deforestation, and it's really important that we understand what that really looks like. This looks like typical deforestation. All those trees have been removed, the land is scraped bare, But from a management perspective, it's not just what happens temporally at that moment. Yeah, that area was deforested, but what happens next? Well, I know that I just happen to know this landowner. This place was reforested. He harvested everything off. He cleaned it. He site prepped it to replant it. He replanted it, and now it's growing again. So it's not really deforestation. It's a successional thing. We managed for succession. This is what deforestation looks like. When you take an area and you denude all the trees, you start to build infrastructure on it, and you know that the only trees that are going to go back on that landscape are ones that the developer comes and plants. And so it's a net loss of forest over time on this particular site. That's what deforestation is. Urban sprawl and development is a large threat to forest and forest health. This happens to be the boundary of our Jones State Forest in Conroe, just north of the city of Houston. I grew up just south of this area. That you can see the forest is completely landlocked by urban development, and we have 50,000 people that live within a quarter mile of that forest boundary. And in some of the cases, those subdivisions right there, those backyards literally have a gate in their fence that opens on the forest. And they treat that forest as a park, not a forest. And that's that definition of use and function. This is a working forest. It is harvested for timber in some areas. There are endangered red-cockaded woodpeckers on that forest that we have to manage for. We're federally mandated to manage for that. That includes prescribed burning, harvesting, thinning, forestry applications that we would normally see back out in rural East Texas. We're doing that right there, basically now in the heart of the Houston urban metroplex. And has a lot of challenges associated with it. And again, there's this concept of fragmentation. When we look on a countywide basis, less than 1% of all of our forests, less than 1% is located more than a mile from an edge. So from an edge of a forest, less than 1% of it is deeper than a mile. It's very, very fragmented. And a lot of that stuff is things that we are doing to ourselves. We see all these little home sites and 5-acre or larger home sites coming in. I want to move out in the woods and have my own little piece of paradise. That's great. I don't fault anybody for that. But we need to understand that at that point, that large contiguous forest that we have has now been subdivided into woodlands. And it's very hard to manage a woodland properly, easily and cheaply, like we could do a forest. We can manage bark beetles by doing timber management. Thinning timber makes the forest more resilient to beetle attack. Well, if you only own 5 acres, you can do that all you want, but your neighbors aren't. If they're not doing it, then that doesn't really help you out very much. I tell people you're at that size, you're stuck. You're between a forest and a yard. In a yard, you can put an insecticide into a tree and save it. In a forest, we can prevent the beetle and we can manage it that way, but it's in that in-between zone where you can't really do anything unless you're just made out of money and you have nothing to do but manage your trees. It becomes very, very complicated. So those are our economic limitations for smaller tract sizes. It becomes unprofitable for loggers to come onto a small tract and take your timber. Well, how do you get rid of old dying trees or manage your property? Well, a logger's not interested. You're going to have to call an arborist. Well, an arborist is going to charge you per tree, and that gets very expensive very, very fast. Likewise, that fragmentation results in more owners. Well, everybody has their own opinion, right? Opinions are like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. And what you do on your landscape might be somewhat totally different than a goal or management technique that your neighbors are doing. And so those various strategies and management, and sometimes no management, leads to unhealthy forests and ultimately sometimes large problems. So that's where forest management comes in. We show up in our uniforms and our fancy trucks, and we're telling those trees, here's what's going to happen. We're going to be the boss now, and we're going to manage that forest and make it healthy. And again, it's not a simple yes, no thing. It's that it depends. What are your forestry management goals? What's the budget? What's the plan? What do you want it to look like when you're finished? And that's really what, again, it depends, right? So people typically think forest management, we're just coming to cut trees down, turn them into boards, walk away, put the money in the wallet and go. But that's not it. It means managing for overall forest health, managing for the reduction of risk, and using these techniques that mimic some of these natural events that would normally occur. Things like fire, things like a hurricane, things like a blowdown event. We mimic those through our forest activities, things through prescribed burning, thinning, and other stand improvement practices. We'll get in there, we'll sometimes use chemical control to remove invasive plants. We'll do reforestation, and yeah, sometimes we'll even come in, cut everything down, and start over, a clear cut. Not a great term, it has some negative connotations, but that is a good management technique in some cases. It just depends on what the goal is and what the landscape looks like. And we achieve those through silviculture or tree management practices. And we make sure that we use BMPs or best management practices to reduce the impact on the landscape. Things like preventing runoff and from getting into your streams and polluting your water quality. We always try to leave a buffer of trees and plants against those streams to protect those waterways and the folks even downstream. And again, just like we saw with forest fragmentation and individual landowners, we have different philosophies of large land management agencies. The National Park Service has a preservation mindset. They want that land to stay in a natural state. Well, we just learned through succession that that isn't really possible. Things change over time. Well, you can manage the heck out of it to keep it at a certain natural state, and that is expensive and time consuming. And if that's the goal, well, that's what you have to do. The Forest Service, the USDA Forest Service, on the other hand, has a concept of land management of conservation, of multiple use. We want to use the greatest amount of, we want the greatest good for the greatest number of people over the long run. And we're going to manage that land for a variety of things: recreation, range growth for, cattle grazing, timbershed, wildlife, all these other things. That's what the U.S. Forest Service manages and how they look at it. And we come back into our private landowners, again, varying goals, objectives. And what we're really seeing, and I've noticed over my career, is that our landowners now are shifting away from, I bought this land to manage it, I want timber out of it, I want fiber, I'm growing this for money for my grandkids to put them through college. We're shifting away from that in the state of Texas, and we're getting into wildlife production, aesthetics, water quality, pollinators, all these different little niches that people have really gotten involved in, and they're managing their land for that, which is great. We're getting away in some cases from that classic stuff into all these other management techniques. But again, those have implications for forest health, and sometimes they're at odds with each other. So it's pretty difficult. I want my land to be perfect for deer production, but I don't want to cut down any of my pine trees. Well, if you want deer, the best place to do that is get some oaks growing in there. We can't grow oaks if it's covered with pine. Oh, and so we have to kind of talk with landowners and come up with a plan for them. And that's where professionals like myself and our friends at the Texas A&M Forest Service provide that information. We, of course, use prescribed fire as one of our main management tools. It's historically always been a natural part of this ecosystem, and we use it to remove competition, enhance that wildlife habitat. It opens it up and allows people to get in the forest, connect with it, recreate in it. It reduces the overall fuel load, and it really enhances the overall health of the forest. We're removing competition. We're putting nitrogen and other nutrients back in the soil, and the residual trees and what our target goal that we're keeping on that landscape is enhanced, and as a result, the overall forest is enhanced as well. But that is, of course, becoming more and more difficult with sprawl and fragmentation, management of the smoke. You can't have smoke clouding Interstate 45. That leads to car wrecks, and TxDOT doesn't really like that. Liability concerns for insurance, and without prescribed burns and or anything to kind of mimic that, we end up with these catastrophic wildfires, and then Alan gets to spend Thanksgiving in a nursing home in North Carolina. So it's kind of be careful with what we do, and sometimes we're not allowed to use the best tool for the job. Like fire, sometimes we will use thinning, and what we'll do is that mimics natural mortality from competition. It could be from uh, mimic what we would see from a beetle infestation or something like that. And what we're doing is we're allowing sunlight and nutrients and water and space for those residual trees to take up and grow larger and healthier. And rather than just losing the trees like we would do in nature, we're able to then actually use those trees for products, right? We're actually mimicking nature's destruction, but getting the benefit by using those trees. And the result, of course, is a healthier forest. And we can see that pretty dramatically how that affects a wildfire in this photograph. The stand on the left was thinned. It was thinned properly to a good stocking level. The stand on the right was unthinned, and a wildfire came in there, and we were able to stop that wildfire at the boundary line because we were able to get in there amongst the thin trees, put a line in, and the fire didn't carry through the thin trees as it did through that non-thin stuff. And you can see what happened to the timber on the right. It has been burned up. So a lot of times we use different management techniques, and here's some forestry terms like seed tree cut or a shelter wood cut or a selective or patch thin, where we go into an infestation and we remove unhealthy, dead, dying trees, and we end up with a small hole in the forest. And this is a southern pine beetle spot that we were able to get on fairly quickly after it was identified. We were able to go in and remove all the infested, dead, dying trees, and we stopped the spot from growing. That's great. But you can see all the trees around it are nice, dark green and healthy. They're well protected, and we ended up with a successful forest management save in that case. This is what a seed tree, a shelter wood cut would look like, where you leave some large trees behind and they're able to drop their seed. They repopulate the same tree species beneath it. This is a management technique that we use so that if you don't want to replant seedlings and buy them, which can be expensive, you let nature seed it back in for you, and you get patchy stocking, and it's not perfect rows, but that's what nature would do. This is a management technique. This is actually a photograph of a seed tree cut, and we compare, we look up close, man, those trees all look green and healthy. But what does it mimic? It mimics a hurricane or a blowdown, where that will come in and knock some of those trees out. The trees that are remaining, they're allowed then to spread their seed all across the ground and continue growth. And that's kind of how we mimic that particular thing with a forest management technique. Up at the top upper left, that looks like a timber harvest. That's actually a tornado touchdown. And then they started to kind of clean up the edges over on the right-hand side where it's nice and straight and linear. But that's what happens when a tornado comes through. It will blow the trees down and we'll start over, right? You basically wipe succession back. We start over with young trees and start that growth process again. Well, we mimic that with something like this. This looks like a hurricane blowdown or a wind event. This is actually a southern pine beetle spot cut and leave operation, where the saw crews have gone in and they've cut down all the infested trees that have bark beetles in them, and they lay them down in the forest and let the bark beetle infestation kind of burn itself out. It looks very similar visually to what we would see from nature, but this is something that we mimic with our chainsaws. And here's a harvest. You can see it kind of does the same thing. It looks like something has gone in there and just wiped out all the trees, similar to what we might see from a southern pine beetle infestation or a wildfire, for example. But this was a harvest that was done intentionally, and it will be reforested. Another major management tool we can do is planting and planting, proper planting and planting of a diversity of species. This is a tree planting project I was just on with a colleague of mine, the University of Texas at Tyler. And basically from the little west entrance there over to main entrance, that southern portion of the campus, we planted 33 different tree species in there. They wanted a tree planting project for Arbor Day. So we came in, they bought the trees, and we said, we'll buy it, but we want a diversity of species. We want your campus to be pretty. We want your campus to be resilient. We're going to put these different ones on your landscape so you don't have all oak trees of the same age that would then be susceptible to a problem. and we were able to diversify their forest. And this is a good strategy that any municipality, homeowners association should really strive for, a diversity of trees on your landscape. That makes a healthy forest. Another management tool we use is sometimes are regulations. There are federal and state regulations to prohibit the possession and transfer and sale of certain prohibited species. But as we can see, the interweb sometimes gets around that. This is Kogon grass being sold on the internet that you can buy and plant it in your garden. How nice. That's how invasive plants get spread around. This is not a good idea, so don't write these web addresses down and order this stuff. This is an invasive plant. We do not want this on the landscape. So what can y'all do as master naturalists? That's the question I always get. How can I help? You guys are involved in the Master Naturalist program because you're interested in this kind of thing. Well, reach out to your land management agencies, reach out to your local communities. One of the most important things that you can do is help promote and help people understand the value that trees provide, especially in our urban settings. And you can use the iTree tool and others that are online to help calculate the value of trees in an area, not just their dollar value, but these ecosystem services that they provide. And really, like we'll see in a minute, it does come down to dollar. We can see that this certain type of tree will remove 950 pounds of pollution per year. And you add up all of what it does, okay, that has a value to it, a dollar value. And so in this one particular preserve over on the North Loop in Texas, where I grew up in Houston, the value of all of that stuff was over $3 million of just those trees on that landscape that you see outlined above. And so it's important that you get out there and put a value on these trees and talk to people about why we need them on the landscape. It's not just enough to say they're pretty and they provide homes for birds and we like the green. We can put actual numbers to it, and that's what planners like to see. You can use the National Tree Benefit Calculator to do individual trees in your neighborhood or at your home. This happens to be a 36-inch live oak that's in my neighbor's property, and I was talking to him about it, and he's like, I'm just going to get rid of that tree. I don't really like it. And I was like, you realize that tree has some benefit for you. And look, man, that thing's providing you $300 in shade and energy cost reduction and keeping your property values up. That's something you might want to consider. And he did, and that tree is still on his landscape today. So that's really nice. You can get involved with a tree inventory. That's one of our big things, especially in our urban areas. Tree inventories are not fun necessarily, they're not sexy, but they're absolutely important to understand what is on a landscape so that we can manage it. You can't run a business or a store if you don't know what you have to sell or how much of what you have to sell. And that's what a tree inventory does. Master naturalists as volunteers are great at helping catalog trees and finding out where they are and they're rating their condition. That's important work that y'all could be working on. If you like to get sweaty, join an eradication project. Talk to one of your land management agencies. We've done some on Brazilian pepper tree over in Port Aransas, and I know Vanessa Neese with Parks and Wildlife is really good at using the Cypress Basin Master Naturalist to help her with her Chinese tallow removal up on Caddo Lake. And those are just two examples, but these kind of projects are a direct way to get out there and physically vent your anger and frustration on some of these invasive species and get them off the landscape. Selfishly, I use Master Naturalist for some of my insect trapping and monitoring efforts. We participate in a program that's nationwide for early detection and rapid response, looking for new pests of conifers in the state that might be unknown, that might show up in one of our traps. So I've leveraged several of our master naturalists. They've set these traps out for me. They send the catches into an identifier, and we look at what's coming in through distribution centers and cargo centers across the state that could potentially start to become an invasive species. As a master naturalist, go to your Forest Service office, contact your land manager in your city, and ask them if they need help monitoring and looking for emerald ash borer. We hang about 550, 600 of these purple traps in trees all across the state. trying to catch emerald ash borer, looking for new infestations, monitoring the spread across environments, and we're always looking for involvement and labor to help with that kind of project. And it pays off. This happens to be a classic thing. If you're out there and you're just observing or you're doing your normal business, if you see something weird, say something, call somebody about it, talk to somebody. The young gentleman on the right, his name's Sam Hunt. He actually, as a young master naturalist and avid photographer, took these 3 photographs of this pretty green beetle he found on his driveway in Fort Worth, and he posted it up on iNaturalist. Well, he was the one that first identified emerald ash borer in the Dallas Metroplex area. And since that young man took that photograph, we now have 6, 7 counties up there that are all infested by this invasive insect. And he was recognized for his efforts by both the Texas A&M Forest Service, USDA Forest Service, with some plaques, and we actually gave the young man a digital camera to thank him for that. And so that's that kind of sentinel effort that you guys being out in the woods, being active, make the contact with the professional land management folks if you see something weird or something that looks out of place, because you never know what it could be. It could be something unknown to us that could be a potential major forest health threat. So a couple of conclusions, right? I got Captain Obvious on here. Forests are decreasing while the value and the need of those forests is increasing. Forests change over time. That's an important concept we have to understand. That's succession. We understand that forest health, what is a healthy forest, is actually a human construct, and it can change over time. And that we achieve our forest management goals, our forest health goals, through forest management. And ideally, we use a multitude of management techniques to achieve those goals. When it's not, every nail doesn't need a hammer on it. We got to put some different techniques out there every now and then. And it's those evolving techniques and processes that we use to achieve our forest health goals. And our former director said something super pithy one time, and I kind of stole that here. And he really said that conservation without compensation is just conversation. And we're finding that out more and more as we talk to cities and planners and decision makers, is they understand trees are important. They understand that there's a value in having pretty parks and people out in the woods. But until you can put it into budgets and until you can put it into dollars, it doesn't really have an impact. And so that's why we went through a lot of those slides with the actual value that these ecosystem services provide. Because when you can frame it in dollars, that's when you get people's decision makers' attention. And I'll leave with this quote here from Mahatma Gandhi, is that what we're doing to the forests of the world is just a mirror reflection of what we're doing to ourselves and to one another. And it's pretty important to think about that we need to take care of that environment just like we take care of ourselves and each other. And so with that, I want to make sure that everybody's not afraid of every single beetle that they see out in the woods out there, right? They're not all bad. So don't panic. And if you have any questions, reach out to your Texas A&M Forest Service. We'd be more than happy to help you and assist you with any of your land management goals or questions. Thanks.
Oh, Alan, this was wonderful. What a wonderful presentation. There were so many great comments and chat questions that came in during, and I certainly learned a lot. And I love that Tom quote of conservation without compensation is merely a conversation. I did drop the links for the iTree tool and the tree benefits calculator in the chat, as well as you were mentioning those, because I thought those were wonderful tools and something that I want to go back and look at for my area where I live specifically as well.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. You'll be kind of shocked to see, man, that tree in my yard that I don't really like all that much. It's kind of dropping leaves and sweet gum balls everywhere. It has some pretty decent value to it, and it's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got just a quick couple of minutes, we had a couple of questions that came in that I'd love to hear the answer to.
Sure.
I was going to ask the first question, but you answered it at the very end. You let up with all of this kind of doom and gloom of the forests and things that are going on. And And really my question was, what can we do? And I thought you really answered that well, as master naturalists have been able to connect with their local Forest Service, connect with land managers, but then also to help educate the public as well. What would be a great way for master naturalists to plug in with their local Forest Service or with their local conservation organizations?
Yeah, so it's that personal one-on-one contact, a phone call, a visit to the office, stop in and say, hey, look, I've got a Master Naturalist chapter. We're looking for hours on a service project. What do you got? I know the Texas A&M Forest Service, we manage several state forests, and they're always looking out there for people to help count species and do different projects. That's a great way to get started. But it's that one-on-one contact. Hey, what can I do to help? You walk in, you introduce yourself. Look, I've got this labor force. We have special skill sets. So maybe we have some equipment, and it's that conversation, getting that conversation started. There's just so much going on out there that we help is greatly needed and appreciated. So.
Great. I'm going to ask just a few questions, and I am going to jump around. They kind of came in out of order a little bit, but following up on that, Stacy asked, "Can I order the emerald ash borer traps and register with Texas A&M Forest Service for my own property? She has many ash trees, but she's just east of the current sightings right now."
Sure. So the short answer is, I mean, you could buy a trap yourself, and I mean, yeah, but it's not a removal tool, right? It's not a trap like a mouse trap. We use them just for population monitoring, and so it's fairly coarse. And we recommend, of course, for emerald ash borer management specifically, that if you have emerald ash borer within about 15 miles of where you are, then you take action. Everything else is just we're waiting, right? Um, it's more work than you think, and so you can reach out and contact me, and if you want to do it, I would say let's do more than one, because it's going to
Takes a
be
little bit of effort.
yeah, it's not as fun as you think.
Well, you were selling it. You were selling it earlier that it was needed.
They're very
Don't
sticky, and you get
don't
stuck to
dismiss it
them, and
now.
yeah.
A question that came in that I was curious about, Thomas asked earlier, why couldn't timber lost to southern pine beetle be cut and milled?
It can, depending, all right, here's depending again, if you can get to it quick enough. So typically we see those losses occur in the summertime, and trees degrade very rapidly in the summertime. So unless you get the wood out within the first month or so, the quality of that wood degrades and no mill will take it. The second problem we have is under large scale infestations, our mills quickly become oversaturated and with beetle killed timber, and therefore the price of your timber, if you're not the first one, goes way down to almost zero, in some cases below zero, and they just won't take it. And so it becomes a supply and demand issue at that point.
That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I've got at least two or three more questions if you're game.
Sure.
Victoria asks, how does a cut and leave cause the beetles? And I'm believing she's talking about the emerald southern pine beetle.
Right.
How does a cut and leave cause the beetles to die out? Don't they just move to living trees and spread the problem?
Sure. So the beetles have egg, larva, pupal, adult stages.
Mm-hmm.
The adults could certainly fly out and reinfest, but what we're really worried about is the brood that are in those trees. And so you're looking at the eggs and the larva. And when you lay the trees on the ground, the solar radiation basically overheats the tree, right? Because if it's standing up, the canopy is intercepting the sun and the heat. When you lay it down, it basically cooks the larva out of those trees, and they don't reemerge. They don't complete their life cycle, and they die out. It's kind of like population control.
And then Regina, asked a follow-up question to that. Is beetle kill timber then tested to prevent infestation outside the forest? And I'd love for you to make a mention of the firewood program that y'all have as well on your website.
Right. So one of the big things that we do is we participate in the Don't Move Firewood program. And firewood is one of the main ways that invasive species are spread across landscapes, countries. Um, when wood is chopped up into firewood type size sticks, it's sometimes very hard to tell what species it is. And so, especially in the state of Texas, right, the emerald ash borer only goes into ash trees. And so you would think, we'll just regulate ash firewood. Well, you can't really tell what firewood is ash firewood and what is not unless you're an expert and have done it a lot. And so the Texas Department of Agriculture quarantines all hardwood firewood from being moved out of an emerald ash borer quarantine county to prevent an accidental spread. And it's very important that we teach people, you know, if you're going someplace to go camping, buy your firewood locally and burn it locally, leave it there. It may be infested with someone, and if you bring the 4 or 5 sticks that you have back home with you, maybe you've brought that invasive species to your place, and you don't want that. And so we buy it locally, we burn it locally, and we leave it there.
And that's part of the education message that Master
Yep.
Naturalists can help with public
Big
as
time.
well.
Yep. And if they're interested, they can contact me. We've got all kinds of flyers and stickers and all kinds of stuff.
Okay. I think I've got one more question that I want to ask, and I'm begging in on your time, Alan. I know you've
Oh,
got a
no.
fire to go help tend to. Um, Diane asked about oak wilt. If a live oak or red oak has already died, is there a way to diagnose oak wilt as the cause? Arborists are saying they haven't seen any in Denton County, where she's at, up in North Texas, but we know it's only a matter of time.
Right. And so, yes, the short answer is yes. You can send tissue samples into a diagnostic lab. And if, the tree's not symptomatic, that would be the only way to do it, is to send some like root samples or some tissue samples in and have it tested. But it's usually pops up and it becomes symptomatic. And if it's symptomatic nearby, then, it's probably pretty good chance. But yes, you can send it into a diagnostic lab and have it tested.
Great. I'm going to wrap up by reading a statement that Anne made in the chat because it sums up how I feel about your presentation today. She said she really appreciated the sequence of the slides towards the end of what Master Naturalist can do. She made new screenshots for all of her new class members that are joining her chapter. And she also she appreciates being made aware of the new online tools, those iTree and the tree benefits calculator, and that she's meeting with her Audubon group in the next month and the city planners to try to have a positive impact on the new vision plan for her city.
Oh, nice.
And that's where Master Naturalist again can help provide some of that education for the public.
Okay, great.
So,
Great. Well, like I said, I'm always happy to help personally, and that's our job, right? We're the Texas Forest Service, that third word service right there. We're here to serve y'all as Texans, and so if there's something that we can do for you as landowners or people interested in land management, reach out to us. That's our job, and we'll be more than happy to help.
Alan, thank you so much for such an informative presentation today. I really, really appreciate it. And for our Master Naturalists, I'll have this recording on the website within the next couple of hours. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving. And I really hope that you get home for Thanksgiving, Alan.
Yeah.
Please
If not,
try
it won't be the first Thanksgiving I've spent away, but yeah, so I appreciate that. And I enjoyed it. You guys are a great organization. And like I said, we're always here to support y'all. So anything we can do.
Well, thank you for your service and for your time today.
No problem.
Everybody have a great week. Thank you.
Yep. Thank y'all.